Are we ready to science the crap out of DevOps? Okay, here's what we're going to talk about. First of all, making your data suck less. Yay!
Take this off.
Oh yeah, let's do that. Writing good survey questions. All the science. What we found that we were excited about, what we found that surprised us. And then we're going to talk about all the tech, all the management, all the security. We're at RSA. Okay, we're going to start here though. I'm going to turn around. People think this hurts my feelings. I started doing like real data, big systems, but we'll start here. Who here thinks surveys are shit? It's fine, don't be
That's
shy.
a remarkably tepid response. I was expecting more.
Who here thinks surveys are shit? It's fine.
We won't judge you.
It's fine, okay. This is good. Who here loves the data in your log files? Right? It's great. Who here has seen shit data in your log files? Right? All the hands. Either way, there are so many things we can do to make our data better, right? People lie. Who here thinks people lie, right? This is why we hate our survey data. Yeah, well, guess what? So do your systems. Either way, we can take steps to make things better. So we're going to have a quick primer on what we do to make our surveys not lie and make our data not suck. And so many of these things that we're going to talk about, you can also do with your log files and with your log data. And I started doing this because I was a performance analyst at IBM, and we were super excited because we had all of this log file coming out of our systems. Everything was great, and everything was awesome, and first the data was bad, so that was bad. So then we fixed the data, and then we realized that all of the data that was awesome was telling us that our box was running really, really, really fast, and then all the people were telling us that our box was slow. And we're like, no, people lie.
Our log files show us that we're right.
Yeah, our log files tell us that we're right, except pretty soon all of the people were telling us that our box was slow in the exact same way, to the exact same degree, in the exact same direction. So sometimes it's worth listening to people. So here's what we're going to talk about. So first, let's talk about a latent construct. This is one way that surveys can be really helpful and can even tell us and inform us about ways that we can use log files in one way. So if I want to ask what the temperature of the room is, I can usually get back one number, unless I ask Jez.
Celsius, y'all.
Right, and then I might get different numbers. But if I want to ask about the job satisfaction of someone or the organizational culture of a team, I can't really get your organizational culture number, right? That just isn't really going to work. But it's still worth measuring and it's still worth knowing because we happen to know that as your organizational culture starts falling apart, your systems start breaking. NASA actually found that as their teams start fighting, their robots that are rotating around like Saturn and Jupiter, their robots start breaking. So this is probably useful to find out, particularly as we're working with security. So what we do is we capture several different aspects of something, and then the underlying thing that is we're trying to measure culture, we can pull all those numbers together and then come up with one number, your organizational culture temperature. We can do the same thing in systems. If we want to know what the overall security score is of something, we can get that one measure. As long as we have several different numbers that account for that or capture that underlying concept or that underlying construct gives us that one measure. The nice thing about that is if people lie, right? They have to lie on every single different thing to the same direction, to the same degree for it to work. If you only lie on one, I can kick that out. I can catch it with my stats. Or in your systems, in your log files, if we have several different indications about your security, if one goes wrong or one goes rogue, or if someone hacks into your system, yay root, right, and they change one number, if I'm only relying on one number, I don't know. But if I have several numbers that help indicate my overall security health or score, and one goes bad, it's a good indication. But if I'm only relying on one number, I'm out. So this is what we do. So by the way, when we do this with security numbers, it's called Psychometrics. This is what we're using when we do the State of DevOps report. We use Psychometrics to make our survey data good, or really give us a reasonable assurance that it's actually telling us what we think it's telling us.
And really, psychometrics is about measuring people's beliefs. So that's what we do. Your beliefs have a real effect on the world. They are real, they are measurable. Psychometrics is the science of measuring people's beliefs.
And it's useful in study of systems, because back that example I told you when I was at IBM, and our log files kept telling us our system was amazing. Well, when people keep telling me my system's slow, that's worthwhile. Turns out my box performance was amazing, except for the interface part. If my interface is slow, it doesn't matter how amazing the entire rest of my box is performing. That was useful. And everyone's beliefs that the box was slow absolutely, absolutely mattered. So, Psychometrics includes, when we talk about surveys, a couple different pieces. So the first one is the construct, the manual piece, right? What it is that we want to measure. So this is based on definitions, theory. We word them very carefully. We use a card sorting task. We run this past other people. We want to make sure they're worded nicely, right? These are not propaganda surveys. We also include very careful statistics. So this is the evaluation piece. The stats, the fun stats part, we use validity, discriminant and convergent validity. I make sure it's measuring only what it's supposed to measure, and it's not measuring anything it's not supposed to measure. I also establish reliability. So I make sure that basically everyone reads it approximately the same way. So here's a fun example. So we went through and we wanted to measure culture. As I mentioned, so we've been hearing, right? I don't know if you've heard, have you guys ever heard that like culture's a thing? Allegedly culture's important? Have we heard this? Maybe. So I've heard culture's important. It came up in pieces of my dissertation. Everyone says culture's important. Okay, so in theory culture's important. Occasionally we would go to management, say culture's important, and some manager like, yeah, no, not here. Only over there. Maybe for that team, maybe for that team. I like data, because sometimes the plural of anecdote isn't anecdata. I want to go and I want to take numbers to help empower teams and people to go to management and say, okay, that's nice. Lots of data says this is important. So let's see if we can help give evidence that culture is important. What kind of culture? So is it more than just intuition? Is it national identity and norms? Is that the kind of culture I'm talking about? That's a culture. In financial literature, we actually find that that kind of culture is important. That's probably not the kind of culture that we're hearing about, right? At least not very often. Okay, I'm seeing heads saying no. An adaptive culture, a culture that values learning. This is getting closer. We found that this was predictive in the 2014 study. But really what it seems to come down to, everyone talks about like, are we hearing things like breaking down silos, trusting everybody. I heard like blameless postmortems, trusting. I'm seeing some nods. Also seeing people reach for coffee. Okay, nods, right? So this was the culture that we wanted to talk about. Values information flow, it values trust. So Jez had this great paper.
Yeah. So this actually comes from a guy called Ron Westrom. So Westrom was an academic who is studying safety outcomes in healthcare and aviation. So in healthcare and aviation, when things go wrong, people die. And so he had this idea that the culture of the organization could predict safety outcomes. And he did a bunch of research and found that that was in fact true. And he created this typology that you can see up here that divides companies up along 6 axes. And then based on where you are on the axis, you might be in a pathological, bureaucratic, or generative organization. So John Allspore, who's now CIO or CTO of Etsy, he has this thing where like you email him and you're like, John, what's up? And he emails me back a PDF of whatever research paper he happens to be reading right now. So like it's quite hard to actually get to talk to John, but he will like email you random papers as a service. And so this is a paper that he emailed me, and we read it and we're like, oh, we could actually use this to do psychometrics on organizational culture so that we can measure your organization's culture and see if it has an impact on your IT performance and your organizational performance.
because it does in other fields. You'll notice these are not survey questions, though.
Oh, hang on, one thing. Who works in an organization that they think is generative? Put your hand up if you think you work in a generative organization. Okay, a small number. Who thinks they work in a bureaucratic organization?
Or has a friend.
Okay, that's a lot of you. Who has not put their hand up yet?
Okay, by the way, across all the data, I think, across several years, I think we're about 30% pathological, 50-ish% bureaucratic, and 20-ish% generative. Okay, so this is what we did. When you write survey questions, use strong statements with clear language. We call them survey questions. They should not be questions. They should be very strong statements so that you can say, strongly disagree, strongly agree. You never want yes, no. So like 1 to 7, at least do a 1 to 5. Pro tip, have odd numbers so that someone can be like, neutral.
No one gets to be neutral.
So this is what we did. And at the team level, right? So on my team, information's actively sought. Failures are learning opportunities, and messengers are not punished. Responsibilities are shared. Cross-functional collaborations encouraged and rewarded. So can you see yourself answering this for your team? Right, this is something that we can strongly agree or strongly disagree with. So this is what we found. This is valid and reliable statistically. The really great thing is that we have also seen this as predictive of IT performance, the ability to deliver code with both speed and stability. This is also predictive of organizational performance, 3 years in a row. There are several teams across the industry now that are using this measure to do a quick checkup on their teams. It's 6 questions. So this is really nice, really powerful. Nerd moment, Dr. Westrom emailed me, and he was like, I hear you're using my stuff. Can I see it? And I'm like, yeah, totally. Emailed him out, and I'm like, oh, I hope I'm doing this right. He said we're doing it right. Yay. This has also appeared in peer review. I didn't do it. Okay.
It's okay. Blameless postmortem, Nicole.
Yes, I did. Sorry. I don't know what I did, though. Okay. Here's another example. So we had an idea that failure notification was going to be important. So we wrote these up at my organization. We are primarily notified of failures by reports from customers. We're notified of failures from the NOC. We get failure alerts from logging and monitoring systems. We monitor system health based on threshold warnings, and we monitor health based on rate of change warnings. Okay, now, this was original in the 2014 study. However, there was a surprise. So statistically, I mentioned I can do an analysis to see how everything falls out. I can do basically what's a statistical card sorting task to see how many piles they land in.
So this is basically like, are these things all measuring the same thing or not? And the answer was,
no.
They're not measuring the same thing. So the stats doesn't tell you like what you did wrong. It's just like, you lose. So you have to then work out, well, actually, is there more than one concept here, or did we just get it all wrong? So we had a second hypothesis.
Yes. So can anyone spot the difference? So I already told you. Spoiler alert. It's not just measuring one thing. Can we spot where that difference is? Can we guess?
Huh?
Okay, maybe types of failures.
Different types of failures.
Okay, here's where they split. Now, it doesn't tell me why. I just have to, surmise why. Now, this is also why, by the way, sometimes when we have logging systems, why we don't just want to have one measure, right? If I was just like, yay, notifications, I'm good. This helps me understand why or what. I have 2 different types of notifications. Can we see why or what? I have some that are coming from farther away, like outside-ish the organization. The NOC isn't outside the organization, but it's farther, right? And customers. Who wants to hear about a failure from Twitter? Let's not do that. And I have failure notifications and failure alerts that are coming from inside and from my systems. Can anyone guess which ones were highly correlated with performance? Closer inside. right? So now we can absolutely strategize resource allocation. By the way, I also do a whole bunch of other data tests to make sure there's no bias introduced in the study and stuff, stats. Okay, now I can look at the data and see how it relates. Okay, kind of, not really. One note really quickly, anytime you read any kind of statistical report that comes out, and people throw in words like prediction and causation and stuff, yeah, not really. One of 3 conditions have to be met. First, the data has to be longitudinal. The State of DevOps Report doesn't meet this. We do it several years in a row, but the responses aren't linked. So if anyone's ever taken the study, you don't ever get a cookie linking your response year over year, so we don't meet this condition. The second, you have to have randomized experimental design. This is non-experimental. So the third is theory-based design. So we do meet this condition. So when this condition is met, we will use words like predict or effects or drives. Otherwise, if this condition is not met, we will only say that things are correlated. Why? Has anyone ever heard of the website Spurious Correlations? I love this website. Did you know that years in which Nicolas Cage movies come out, pool deaths, like backyard pools, deaths go up? They're almost perfectly correlated. Who here thinks that Nicolas Cage movies cause backyard pool deaths?
Tough crowd,
Possibly.
Nicole. Tough crowd.
Tough crowd, possibly. That is why, like, just because, and the correlation, it's like 90% or something. That's why, just because the data's there, occasionally people will say, well, doesn't that mean you're fishing for data? Doesn't that mean you're just confirming your own hypotheses? This is just, That's also called, like, the scientific method, right? You state your hypothesis, you test your hypothesis. Otherwise, if I just go digging for data, I mean, also, like, cheese consumption and strangulation by bed sheets. Okay.
Okay, so if you only take one thing, now we're going to talk about the results. So we've been doing this for 5 years now with Puppet, Gene Kim, us working on the State of DevOps data. I'm going to give you in the next 10 minutes a very quick summary of the results. If you only take one thing away from this talk, it's this. We're taught that moving fast and breaking things is a zero-sum game. That if you move faster, necessarily you're going to break stuff and your systems are going to be less stable. This is not true. Organizations who are able to move faster also build more stable, resilient systems. It's not a trade-off. It's not a zero-sum game. The data is very clear. The best companies are able to move fast and produce more stable and resilient systems. And the practices that enable that, such as continuous delivery, enable both of those things. And this is true across many different organizational sizes, from startups right through to enormous enterprises, and across multiple domains. And we have a lot of responses from regulated domains like healthcare and government and financial services. So this is true across the board. People like to say, that won't work here because we're X, where X is normally regulated or big. Those are just excuses. We have big companies who are able to do this. No one is a special snowflake, except in as much as everyone is a special snowflake. So we measure these 4 things to measure IT performance. The top 2 things measure tempo, how fast you can move, so lead time for changes and release frequency. The second part is stability. When you have an outage or a service degradation, how long does it take you to restore service? And then change fail rate, when you push out a change, what percentage of the time do you get an outage, or you have to roll forward or roll back or whatever. And so statistically, we find this is a valid measure, which is already a big deal because we've been looking for a measure of organizational performance for IT, or IT performance as we call it, for a really long time, and we haven't been able to find one. And there's a number of reasons for that, which I won't go into now, but this is a valid measure of the performance of your IT organization. Using stats, we can divide the population. Every year, it divides neatly into 3 parts: high performers, medium performers, low performers. And as I just said, the high performers do better at both of these things. It's not a trade-off. High performers do better on tempo.
In statistically significant ways.
In statistically significant ways. The second thing...
And the medium performers are in the middle at everything, no trade-offs. And the low performers suck at everything. And we're super creative, so we call them high, medium, and low. And as John mentioned, this is based on economics. It's based on economic order quantity.
So the second thing is that IT performance actually matters. People have been saying for years, IT performance won't allow you to create a sustainable competitive advantage. This is the famous assertion by Nicholas Carr, who wrote that article in Harvard Business Review. We found that's not true. Firms with high-performing IT organizations were twice as likely to exceed their organizational performance goals, and there's a standard measure for that, which is measured in terms of profitability, market share, and productivity. So IT performance predicts organizational performance. And this basically gives you a quick idea of how the different groups shake out in terms of the high performers are performing multiple deployments per day. Their change fail rate is pretty short. They can restore service in less than an hour, typically, in the event of an outage of one of their services, compared to the low performers, who are typically releasing, on a monthly basis, and they can just about restore service in less than 1 day. So that's kind of the range that we're seeing. In terms of what predicts IT performance, that really is a million-dollar question, obviously. We tested a lot of things to do with technical practices, and management practices, and culture. So technical practices, we created a construct that we call continuous delivery. And what continuous delivery is made up from is all these things on the left. So by continuous delivery, we mean effective test data management, comprehensive, fast, and reliable test and deployment automation, trunk-based development, which means not working on long-lived feature branches, but making sure your code goes into trunk on at least a daily basis. Having your code, application, and system configuration all in version control, and incorporating security practices and security teams into the delivery process, not having them as separate silos that are downstream of the development process. And these things predict not only higher levels of IT performance, but also lower levels of deployment pain and less rework, and it's not on here, but also lower levels of burnout in your organization.
Yes. Yeah. So everywhere to the right of CD, all those arrows mean drive, predict, impact.
However, there were some surprises. So I'm very into measuring effective test practices, like which test practices work and which ones don't. So have a guess at which one of these test practices either have no correlation with IT performance or just aren't the same as any of these things. Okay, I'm going to give you the answer because we're short of time. When you have a separate testing group that primarily creates and maintains acceptance tests, that doesn't improve IT performance. When your tests are primarily created and maintained by an outsourced party, that has no correlation with IT performance. And also, for some reason, when developers create their own on-demand test environments as opposed to sharing a common pool of test servers or using their dev environments, that has no correlation with IT performance. We don't know why that is. The top two things, I do have a hypothesis for this, and my hypothesis is that testers need to be working with developers as part of the development process. When you have testers doing the testing downstream, what happens is the developers think that quality is not their problem, it's someone else's problem, and they write shitty code, and then it's up to the testers to get them to fix it. Testers and developers need to work together on building and creating the automated tests as part of the development process. And we have the data that shows that this is the case. So we also wanted to find out about quality, and quality is really difficult to measure, but there's some useful proxy variables, and the one proxy variable that we found did actually load and worked was unplanned work. And what we find is that high performers spend 20% more time on building new stuff than low performers, and 22% less time on unplanned work and rework. And what that means is they are building quality in and getting it right the first time. And thus, they don't have to find out later on that something was wrong and spend all this time fixing it. They're building quality in. They're not letting downstream processes like downstream QA and operations find the bugs and then have to do a ton of rework. Some surprises with culture. We're going to have to we only have like 2 minutes.
Skip this.
Yeah, the TLDR is that what we found basically is the same as what Google found when Google found some research, which is the top factor in creating innovative organizations and organizations with high performance in terms of like not creating loads of safety and defects and so forth, is psychological safety. The most important thing you can do is create psychological safety within your team.
Have good trust. Making the perfect team doesn't come down to like the magical mix of right skills. It comes down to the magical mix of awesome team and trust and psychological safety and dependability.
You cannot hire, quote, A players, unquote, and build a great organization that way. Your organizational culture is the dominant factor. What will happen is if you hire like A players, and by the way, I don't believe in individual performance as a thing. If you hire A players, what will happen is your shitty organizational culture will drive them out or destroy them.
Individuals don't ship software, teams do. Say it all together now. Individuals don't ship software, teams do.
Just one surprise on management. We all know managing work in process is important, right? Right? Turns out correlation between work in process and IT performance is negligible. WTF? It turns out that actually you need all the things on the left-hand side. You also need to use visual displays. You also need to use monitoring tools. You need to do all of those things together. The data shows that just managing WIP isn't important in its own right. You have to combine it with these other things.
You need to be doing lean management practices all together.
Okay, so
And then it's great.
here's the end.
If you think it's obvious, test with data. If you're always surprised, you're doing it wrong. If you're never surprised, you're also probably doing it wrong. Something's wrong. You can have it all, or at least throughput and stability.
Culture matters, it's measurable.
IT matters. Nicholas Carr was wrong, but you have to be doing it right. If you're doing the DevOps, you can have throughput and stability.
Go to our website. You can still take the State of DevOps report. Please do that. Help us do more science. Help us find out what actually works and what doesn't work. And we publish all this stuff for free. We publish papers. You can get all the results of this stuff for free and use it to make your organization better. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.